Hello everyone, my name is Emily Rudy, and today I will be giving you a presentation on the life history of whitetail deer. So to begin, I just wanted to start off with how are they named. So this is just a generalization of how species are named in general. All species of mammals, insects, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and fish are named with a system that we know as taxonomy. Taxonomy is a system that is used to group specific species into categories based on their ancestry, their DNA, and physical similarities that they have. So to the right over here, I have a phylogeny, which is like a tree of all of the species that are closely related to whitetail deer. So continuing on, what are they? What are whitetail deer? Here on this slide, I have a list of all of the taxonomic classes and labels that they are found in. So first, they are found in the kingdom of Animalia. They're found in the phylum Chordata, the class Mammalia, the order Artiodactyla, the family Cervidae, the subfamily Capreolinae, the genus Odocoileus, and the species Odocoileus virginiensis. And this species of whitetail deer was named in 1780. If you look to the right, there's a picture of the man who named them. His name was Eberhard August Wilhelm von Zimmermann. So where did whitetail deer come from? It is believed that whitetail deer were first found to inhabit very, very cold areas in the Arctic Circle. And then about 4 million years ago, the very first whitetail deer migrated from the Arctic Circle to what we know now as the United States. So where can they be found today? Whitetail deer are native to North America, Central America, Ecuador, and South America. And when you say that they are native to this area, that means they are naturally found here. They have also been introduced to countries like New Zealand, Cuba, Jamaica, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and some countries in Europe, which includes the Czech Republic, Finland, Romania, Serbia, Germany, and France. And when you say that they've been introduced, that means that the species is not native, so they are not found there naturally. They had to have been brought over either by a conservation biologist or accidentally through traveling and whatnot. So that's what it means when they've been introduced. And to the right, I just have a little picture of a map for their geographic distribution for the areas that they are native to. So that includes North America, Central America, Ecuador, and South America. So continuing on with where they can be found today, in the United States, Texas, the state of Texas actually has the highest amount of whitetail deer of any other state, and even Canada. So in the state of Texas, it is estimated that there are over 4 million deer just in that state alone. All right, so what do whitetail deer look like? So the color of the deer's fur or their coat is going to be a deep reddish to a deep brownish color during the spring and summer months. And the scientific term that we use to describe the color of fur is called their pelage. So during the fall and winter months, that color of their pelage, their fur, will change to like a gray shade from that deep red or deep brown. Another key characteristic to how the whitetail deer look is the white underside that is near the rear of it that goes all the way to the end of its tail. And if you look over in the picture right here, you can see the tip of the tail has some white fur on it, and it follows it all the way up to the back and then down to the underside. And you can very distinctly see that white fur, and that is why they are called white-tail deer. So some more on what they look like. White-tailed deer are highly variable in size, which means that they can range from very big to very small. They do not have just one typical size for all of them. So male deer can weigh anywhere from 150 to 300 pounds, which is a large gap. It's the 150 to 300 is double the weight. So you can really see from that they have a wide variety of weight. And it's also been recorded that some mature bucks, which are male deer, have even been recorded to weigh over 400 pounds. So those are the largest of the white-tailed deer. And one thing that is not on the slide that I wanted to mention is that the male deer are bigger than the female deer. Generally speaking, they're larger, they're more muscular, and you can just very much tell the difference between an adult male deer and an adult female deer. These deer also follow Allen's rule, and Allen's rule states that the closer to the equator they are, that the smaller in size they are, and vice versa. So as they get closer and closer to the equator, they are smaller and smaller in the size that they range from. And as they get further and further away from the equator, they are larger and larger in size. So basically, where it's warmer and closer to the equator, they are found to be smaller. And where it is colder and further away from the equator, they are found to be much larger, around that 300-pound mark versus the 150 pounds. So now we are going to talk about something that is found on male deer. It is typically only found in male deer. However, 1 in every 10,000 female deer can have these. And what we're talking about are antlers. So you can see in these pictures the little bone-like looking structures that are coming out of the deer's head. Those are their antlers. And so on the left-hand side, we have a picture of a male deer, a buck, with antlers, and his antlers still have this thing called velvet on them. And then if you look over to the right, you can see this deer. This deer's antlers seem bloody, if you can tell. They have some blood on them, and that is because this male deer has been shedding his velvet. So he has been getting rid of his velvet, and I will explain more of how they do that in the next slide. So going a little further as to what antlers actually are, they are like branched horns that come out of the deer's head, and they are made of bones. And one thing that is cool to note about deer and their antlers is that male deer regrow their antlers every single year. So they do not keep them all year round. They grow them and then they shed them off. So the length and the branching of the antlers is determined based on the levels of nutrition that the deer has in their habitat, how old they are, so their age, and their genetics. And the velvet, which I was talking about earlier, on the deer antlers is made up of a highly vascularized tissue. And so this velvet is on the deer antlers, and then as time passes, the velvet gets itchy to them, so they will rub their antlers against the trees to scrape it off. And when they do this, because the velvet has lots of vessels and tissue in it, that is what causes them to bleed. So some bucks will have antlers that are atypical. And when they're atypical, that means that the buck's antlers are not symmetrical. So they don't look the same on both sides. And that also means that the points of bone on the antlers can actually grow out of the main beam of bone at any angle. Once mating season is over, however, and all of the females have been bred, that is when the males will lose their antlers, and then they will not regrow them again until the next year before breeding season. And so if you look over to the right, there's a picture of two male deer, one with atypical antlers on the left. You can see that these antlers are not symmetrical. The bones are growing off of the main beam at upwards, downwards, diagonally, sideways. There are tiny pieces coming off of the little spurts that are coming out, so they are not very symmetrical at all. However, on the right side, the rightmost deer, you can see that his antlers are pretty even. The length of each spike that is coming out of the main beam is relatively the same on both sides, and they have the same number of spikes coming out. So if you count, you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 spikes coming out of this deer's antlers. So now let's talk a little bit about what white-tailed deer eat. Their diet, believe it or not, is not the same as humans. So white-tailed deer eat a lot of food, which includes legumes, which are the fruits or the seeds of plants. They eat plant stems, they eat leaves, they eat cacti for the ones that live in more like desert-like areas. They eat grasses, they eat acorns, they eat fruit, and they eat actual corn, which is something that we all know of. So white-tailed deer are actually mostly herbivorous, and that means that they mainly eat plants, so they don't typically eat meat from other animals. However, with that being said, they have been known to feed on field mice and various small birds. So they are not completely herbivorous. Sometimes they are omnivorous, which means that they eat both plants and animals. But most of the time when you see a white-tailed deer eating, it is probably going to be eating a plant or a nut or a fruit of some sorts. So now let's talk a little bit about the special characteristic that deer have. So white-tailed deer are classified as a ruminant. Being a ruminant, this means that their stomach has 4 different chambers/sections. So you can see on this little diagram over here, it's not the best picture, but you can see their stomach in it and the 4 different chambers that are in the stomach. So each of the 4 chambers has their own special function that is used to digest different types of foods. And the special stomach that they have, the 4 different chambers, actually allows white-tailed deer to be able to digest and eat things like mushrooms and poison ivy, which is something that humans cannot do. So what are the different types of deer? And what do I mean by this? Well, overall, there are 26 different subspecies of white-tailed deer. So that means that of the original species of white-tailed deer that we have, there are 26 subspecies underneath of that. And 17 out of those 26 subspecies are actually found in North America, while the other 9 are found in the other countries that we talked about earlier, like the countries in Europe, and some of the countries in South America, and like Ecuador, and Bolivia and Peru. And so these different subspecies of white-tailed deer, they have different aspects such as their height, their weight, and their coloration. So the reason that there are different subspecies of white-tailed deer is because depending on where they live, whether it's closer to the equator or further away from the equator, you're going to see populations that look the same, but they look the same as the deer that are in their population, but not the same deer that are in a population in a different country. And so those diagnostic characteristics, those physical things that we can see, and some genetic differentiation is what classifies them as a subspecies. So one of the most notably different subspecies of the Odocoileus virginiensis is the Odocoileus virginiensis clavium. And the Odocoileus virginiensis clavium are known as the key deer. And these key deer are found to live in the Florida Keys. And so if you do not know where the Florida Keys are, they are like a little string of islands that are off the very tip of the southern peninsula of the state of Florida. And there's like a bridge that connects the Keys to the mainland of Florida, but that is where these key deer are found. The key deer are classified as an endangered species, and what that means is that 50 to 70% of their population has decreased over 10 years, or they have a population size that is less than 2,500 adults, or them being endangered could be based off of a scientific prediction that the species will go extinct within the next 20 years. And importantly about the key deer is that they are the smallest in size subspecies of white-tailed deer in the entire United States. So of all the different subspecies that we can find in the United States, these key deer are the smallest with their size and their weight. So another really cool group of white-tailed deer are known as the Seneca white deer. And so this group of deer is found in New York, and their fur is actually completely white. The only parts of their bodies that are not completely white and covered with white fur are their noses and their toes. And so this population of deer is found in the former Seneca Army Depot, which is located in the town of Romulus, New York. And the reason that this group of white deer has been able to survive is because they've been protected by the state of New York due to conservation efforts to keep this population alive, or else the population most likely would not still be there, because having all white fur like that makes them very easy for predators to spot them, and it makes them a very big target. So without the conservation efforts that have kept these deer alive, their population probably would have been extinct by now. So moving on to our next topic, what habitats do white-tailed deer live in? So many of you know that white-tailed deer typically live in forests, at least here in Wheeling, West Virginia. You can see them up on the hill in the forest and in the tree lines of Oglebay, and you can see them coming out of trees and coming out of like woodland areas, but they are also really, really great at adapting to different habitats, which means that there are species of white-tailed deer, subspecies of white-tailed deer, that can also live in areas such as savanna woodlands, open prairies, and sage communities. So that means they can be found in warmer areas that do not have as much coverage as what trees would give them. So there aren't as many places to hide as far as having a big tree to be able to hide behind. And they are found in open prairies, which are full of grass and tall plants and various things like that. So these white-tailed deer really are good at adapting to different areas based on what part of the Americas or what part of Europe they are found in. Now let's talk about what the main predators of white-tailed deer happen to be. So some of the main predators that eat and kill white-tailed deer are wolves, cougars, American alligators, jaguars, bobcats, wolverines, coyotes, and grizzly and black bears. And not only are white-tailed deer hunted actively by these predators, but the carcass, which is like the dead remains of the white-tailed deer, is also something that scavenger animals, such as vultures, raptors, different foxes, and corvids, they rely on that carcass to get their food and to get their nutrients. And scavengers are animals that consume their food and their protein and their nutrients from dead animals. So they scavenge around looking for something that has already been killed to kind of pick off of to eat, so they don't have to actively spend time and energy chasing, hunting, and killing something. They just eat whatever is. Now let's talk about. So not only do white-tailed deer have other animals as predators, but humans are actually the most effective natural predators of white-tailed deer. And that is because we hunt them for their meat and their furs. It is estimated that about 6 million deer are killed every single year just from hunting in the United States. And some records show that from the 2017 to 2018 hunting season, about 918,009 white-tailed deer were hunted just in the state of Texas. And as we already know, the state of Texas has over 4 million white-tailed deer itself, having the highest population of any other state. So that is almost 1/4 of the entire population that was hunted during that year. And the reason that we have hunting happen, the reason that people are allowed to hunt deer, is because if we didn't allow deer to be hunted, then they would get overpopulated. And what happens when the population of white-tailed deer becomes overpopulated is that all of the things that white-tailed deer eat, all of the things that they consume, all of those plants, those legumes, those fruits, those seeds, those would be less available to other species that need to eat them. So if there are too many deer, then they would eat all of the food, which would mean that there's not enough food for the other animals, like chipmunks or squirrels or different birds and whatnot, and different land mammals that eat those grasses and nuts and legumes. So that would cause their populations to die off. So that is why we allow hunting in the states and as part of like their predation, is because without that they would become overpopulated, and that would cause harm to other populations of animals and birds and things like that, that need the same food that white-tailed deer eat. Another thing that is very important to note about white-tailed deer is that they are involved in lots of car accidents every year, and that causes them to die. So that takes care of some of the population control that hunting does not. It is estimated that about 1.5 million deer each year are killed in an automobile accident. So they might run out in front of a car, they might be there and a car comes around a corner and hits them. But over 1.5 million white-tailed deer are killed every year just in automobile accidents. So we just spent some time talking about the things, the animals, the people, the cars, and the ways that white-tailed deer are killed. So now let's spend some time talking about their defense mechanisms and the things that they do to protect themselves from predation and from being eaten or from being killed. So when white-tailed deer feel threatened, they will do a couple of actions to escape that threat and to warn other deer around them. And so first, something that they do is they will blow, which is when they breathe very heavily and that heavy breathing creates a sound, and that sound can be heard by other deer that are nearby and in close range of the deer that made that blowing sound. And so that sound will alert the other deer that are nearby that there is a predator around. And then another thing that white-tailed deer do that I'm sure almost everyone has seen is that they will flee and run away. And while they're running away, they will flash their tail straight up, and you can see that white line that goes straight from the tip of the tail in the picture on the right, all the way down. So they'll flash that white tail up, which serves as a visual for any other deer that are in the surrounding area, such as a mother deer and her babies, or other bucks or does that are in the area to let them know that there is a predator. And so they use that visual signal to alert other deer that danger is nearby. So to just go a little bit more in depth about white-tailed deer and their defense mechanisms, it's really important to mention that white-tailed deer are very fast animals. So it has actually been recorded that white-tailed deer can run as fast as 47 miles per hour, which is very fast for an animal. They can also jump as high as 9 feet straight up into the air, so they can jump 9 feet vertically. And something else that's really important is that white-tailed deer can leap as much as 30 feet forwards in the air. So when they take off running, they can leap 30 feet, which is 10 yards into the air in front of them. And when white-tailed deer are frightened, that they will hop in a zigzag pattern, but sometimes they may even charge a predator and fight it off with their antlers or their head. And so if you've ever been hunting and you've shot at a deer and you missed, you probably saw that deer start jumping from side to side in that zigzag pattern. And that is a defense mechanism they use, particularly when being hunted, because it makes it much harder for whether the gun that you're shooting or the predator that is chasing them to chase them well, because they go from side to side, which kind of throws a pattern off. And over here on the right, we can see a picture of a real buck, a living buck, charging a fake buck that is probably used for target practice of some sorts. He probably either felt intimidated or frightened or was trying to compete with this buck to assert his dominance for breeding purposes. But we can see this buck using his antlers and his head and charging the fake deer here. So now let's spend some time talking about how white-tailed deer reproduce. So female deer, aka does, they are actually capable of mating at a very young age, and that can happen anywhere between 6 to 18 months old. So if you think about it, when you were 6 to 18 months old, most of you could not walk or talk. And so that's really interesting and cool to know that white-tailed deer are already capable of reproducing between 6 to 18 months of age. And so when a male and female deer mate, the female deer, will give birth to anywhere from 1 to 3 spotted young. And these spotted young are called fawns. And so this picture over here on the right is a picture of a baby deer or a fawn. You can see all of the spots on its back, and eventually that little baby fawn will lose its spots, and its coat, its pelage will all be one solid color, and it will not have those spots on it any longer. So for the first 4 weeks of life after these fawns are born, their mothers will actually hide the baby deer in tall grass and different vegetation, and by doing this, this masks the scent of the baby deer. And that is important because baby deer are basically defenseless against any predators that they may come into contact with. And so if a predator were to smell them and get a whiff of the way that they smell, they would most likely be eaten or killed because they really cannot defend themselves against any predators. So that is why it's really important for them to be hidden for the first 4 weeks before they can walk and run properly and defend themselves. So that way that they don't face predation at such a young age, and that all the baby deer do not get eaten. So to continue talking about baby deer or fawns, in most cases, we will see that fawns are weaned off of their mothers, and they will stop nursing around 8 to 10 weeks old. So the milk that they nurse and eat from their mothers, that will stop around 8 to 10 weeks old. However, there has been some research that has shown that the fawns will not stop nursing at that 8 to 10 week mark, but instead they will nurse through the entire fall season for several months until they lose their spots. And so another thing is that male deer leave their mothers after a year of age. So once male deer are a year old, they will leave their mothers. However, it takes female deer to be 2 years old before they leave their mothers. And because males leave after a year, it's important to note that they become sexually mature at a year and a half old, which is just around the same time as what most female deer become sexually mature. And once those male deer do become sexually mature, they will begin to breed. Even if they are only a year and a half old, and the population that they're in has lots of older bucks, those yearlings, those year and a half old deer, they will begin to breed and mate and reproduce. So now let's spend some time talking about how white-tailed deer communicate. So we as humans use words and hand motions and different sounds. Like when you were a baby, you would cry, when you had to use the bathroom, or when you were hungry. So white-tailed deer obviously cannot speak with words the way that humans do, but they can still use different actions like sounds, scent, their body language, and marking, which we'll talk about just a little bit later, to communicate with each other. And so one of the most frequent times that we'll hear white-tailed deer use sounds is when fawns make a little high-pitched squeal. That high-pitched squeal is known as a bleat, and they make that little squeal to communicate with their mothers. And when they make that squeal to communicate with their mothers, the mothers respond with a maternal grunt that is used to communicate back to the fawns, probably to figure out where each other is, or to communicate for the fawns to either come to the mother or for the mother to come back to the fawns. Bucks can also use sounds. They will make a lower pitched grunting noise to communicate with each other, and they'll make that noise if they need to communicate whether or not there's a predator nearby. They'll also make that noise when they are going head to head against each other and trying to assert their dominance. So that's something that they use making noise for. And then another thing that they do that's very interesting is called marking. So they mark territories and trees. And so white-tailed deer have different glands on their bodies, and all of the glands have different functions, but these glands on their bodies are actually used to produce smells. And the smells that they leave these smells in areas that they are trying to mark to let other deer know that they have been there. Something that's really cool that deer do is this thing called rub urination. So whitetail deer do this process of rub urination, which is where when the deer is urinating or peeing, the deer will squat down and the urine that is coming out will run down the inside of the deer's back legs and all over different glands. It'll cover all of the hairs over there. And so whenever these deer are moving around, they will leave that scent on trees or on leaves or on different plants and whatnot. And that scent lets other bucks or even female does know that that buck is there in the area. And another part of marking is that bucks will physically use their antlers to scratch lines into trees to create a mark. And they don't just do that for the sake of females or males to know that they're there, but they also do that so that they can sharpen and polish their antlers after they've shed the velvet. Now, another very important question to ask about whitetail deer is, can they be harmful? Because most of the time, we really don't think that whitetail deer can hurt us unless if we hit them with a car or they hit our car. And so, yes, whitetail deer can be harmful in the sense because they can spread different infectious diseases to other deer, to livestock, and even to us as humans. And one of the main infectious diseases that is spread because of whitetail deer is Lyme disease. And the way that that Lyme disease gets spread is that because whitetail deer are the main hosts for black-legged ticks, adult black-legged ticks. And those adult black-legged ticks are the ticks, they're also known as deer ticks. They are the ones that are most commonly known for transmitting Lyme disease to humans. So now let's talk about when whitetail deer are active. So many whitetail deer are active and move throughout the entire day. However, they are most active and they move the most at dusk and at dawn, which means they move the most early in the morning when the sun is rising, and then right after the sun sets in the evening. And so the amount of activity that deer have and that they do, the amount that they move, that is all based on a bunch of different things that includes their age, their sex, so whether they're male or female, the season, so fall, winter, spring, summer, the habitat that they're in, what the weather is like that day, whether it's warm or cold or raining or sunny, and human disturbance. So if humans were out hunting them or driving by and startling them and causing them to move. And so something that's important to note is that male deer are actually going to be the most active and they will move the most during breeding season, and female deer are least active during and after fawning. And fawning is where the mother deer, the does that are the mothers of the fawns, that is when they are out foraging or trying to find food or different things like that, and when they return to feed their babies. So that is when they are least active. So now let's talk about whether or not whitetail deer migrate. So there are actually 3 different types of migration strategies that whitetail deer can or will utilize. And so the first one of those strategies is a non-migratory strategy. And that means that that group of deer will stay in the same area, the same place, the same habitat year-round. So they will not migrate. The second strategy is being an obligate migrator. And that means that that population of deer will migrate every year. And so they will migrate from wherever they are to a new place every year. And then the last strategy is being a conditional migrator. And that means that they might migrate some years, but it definitely will not happen every year. And the interesting thing about that is that all of these strategies can be observed in the same population. And so some research has actually been done that has shown that the fawns or the babies of the mothers will be more likely to migrate if their mother migrates, and less likely to migrate if their mother does not migrate. So there's a pattern between that relationship. And then now let's talk about what causes these whitetail deer to migrate. So in North American whitetail deer, they migrate either as obligate migrators or conditional migrators as a response to the weather or temperatures getting colder and due to snowfall. So once it starts to get colder out or when it snows, they may migrate to a warmer area. And then once it's gone from winter to spring to summer, they will begin to return to their original habitat where it's warmer once there is food and coverage available again for them to sustain the life that they were living previously. Okay, so let's do a brief recap on all that we have learned today about the life history of whitetail deer. So, their species name is Odocoleus virginiensis, and they were given that species name by a man named Eberhard August Wilhelm von Zimmermann. Whitetail deer are native to the Americas, so North America, Central America, and South America, and they have been introduced, so taken over, to countries in Europe, New Zealand, Cuba, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico. In the United States, the largest population of whitetail deer is found in Texas, with there being over 4 million whitetail deer just in the state of Texas alone. They tend to have a reddish-brown pelage color in the spring and summertime, and then during the fall and winter, their fur tends to turn a more grayish color. One of the key physical characteristics of a whitetail deer is exactly what is in the name, their white tail. So from the very tip of the tail just to the rear and underneath, you can see the white fur. It's very distinct. These whitetail deer are highly variable in size, and they can range anywhere as full-grown adults between 150 to 400 pounds. They have antlers, which are bones that grow out of their head. In the beginning, the antlers have this vascularized tissue known as velvet on them. Once the velvet becomes itchy, they begin scraping that off, which causes it to bleed. And then as far as the shape of their antlers goes, it can either be asymmetrical or symmetrical. Remember, which means that the points on the main beam can either be the same in number and come out of the same direction or not. They can come out at any angle and look very different from side to side. They do grow and lose their antlers every year. They grow them before breeding season, and then once all of the females have been bred with, that is when they lose their antlers. Whitetail deer are mainly herbivorous, but they can be found to eat some field mice and small birds, making them omnivores at times, but they do mainly eat just plants and nuts and legumes and fruits and things of that nature. They are ruminants, which means they have a 4-chambered stomach, and each section of the 4-chambered stomach is for a specific type of digestion. There are different subspecies of white-tailed deer, like the key deer, which are found in Key West, and remember they tend to be much smaller than white-tailed deer here in Wheeling because of something called Allen's rule, which states that the closer to the equator you are, the smaller you will be. And the Seneca white deer, which are found in New York, that have all white fur except on their noses and their feet. White-tailed deer tend to live mainly in forests, especially where that habitat is available, but they are highly adaptive to land areas, so they can be found in savanna woodlands and also prairies. White-tailed deer have many predators, including bears, wolves, wolverines, bobcats, foxes, things of that nature. But humans are the number one predator. Remember we talked about how not only do predators eat them, but their carcasses are also heavily relied upon by animals that are scavengers, like hawks, that need to get their food from the carcass of a deer. So remember that. Some of their major defense mechanisms that they utilize are blowing, which is the heavy breathing that they put out that can be heard by nearby deer, and fleeing, so running away and spiking their tail up in the air to let other deer that are nearby be able to see that white color, to warn the deer around them that there is potential threat, a predator or danger nearby. And remember, they can run as fast as 47 miles per hour. They can jump up to 9 feet in the air and vertically, and they can leap up to 30 feet forwards. As far as sexual maturity goes, females can mature anywhere from 6 to 18 months of age, and males are typically sexually mature at a year and a half. Males tend to stay with the mother for a year, whereas females tend to stay with the mother for 2 years. And fawns stay hidden for the first 4 weeks of their lives. The mother hides them in grasses and vegetation to mask their scent, which is to help avoid predation because they are helpless at that age. So they need that scent to be masked so that they are not identifiable by nearby predators. They can use sound, body language, scent, and marking to communicate. So remember we talked about how fawns will make those high-pitched squeals and the mothers will make the maternal grunts to communicate back and forth. We also talked about the way that they leave their scent with their urine on trees and plants and whatnot as they're going past to let other bucks and does know that buck has been there. White-tailed deer can spread disease, so they can be harmful. They're the major host of the black-legged tick, which is a main carrier of Lyme disease. They are mainly active at dusk and dawn, so in the morning when the sun rises and in the evening after it sets. They can be active during the whole day. Males are way more active during breeding season, and females are least active after fawning, so foraging and feeding their babies. There are 3 types of migratory strategies they can practice: being non-migratory, so they don't migrate at all; obligate migrants, which means they migrate every year; or conditional migrants, which means they migrate some years but not all years. And those can all occur in the same population, which would be caused by weather and colder temperatures coming and snow, which would cause them to move to somewhere warmer until they can return to their original habitat once they have food and are able to forage there. And that is everything. So I hope you learned something. from this presentation and that you're a little more knowledgeable about the life history of white-tailed deer. Thank you for listening and have a great day.